The first panelist for this session has worked in e-commerce across Asia. He was the CMO of Lazada in Indonesia. Currently, that panelist is also heading an investment app called Syfe. So he's the CMO of Syfe in Singapore. He's been working in Syfe for the past 4 years. He has been able to grow Syfe to 100K users across Singapore, Hong Kong, and Australia. Please welcome Sebastian Sieber onto the stage. Our next panelist has actually worked in retail, banking, and payment sectors across India and Middle East. He has also set up a startup in the ad tech space. So he's been an entrepreneur as well. And now he's working at Singtel and managing the financial services business. Basically, how to increase the revenue of non-telco customers for Singtel. Please welcome Atit Divecha onto the stage, our second panelist for the session today. Our next panelist works for an app which needs no introduction. I'm sure all of us use that app on a daily basis. And I'm sure everyone would have probably used that app to come here. So our next panelist has actually worked in the digital ecosystems for the past decade across multiple markets, across multiple sectors. Currently, he is heading the performance marketing, CRM, and MarTech regionally for Grab. Please welcome Srivatsa Udupa onto the stage. And lastly, but not the least, our last panelist is someone who's worked in fast-growing startup and fast-growing technologies like Anchor and e-technology across various product management and marketing roles with a clear KPI of how to increase subscriptions. How do you ensure that money comes out of all your customers on a daily or a monthly or a weekly basis? Currently, he's heading product for an app called Muslim Pro. And for those of you who don't know about Muslim Pro has 150 million global downloads. And it's a it's a religious utility app which is being used by customers across the globe. Please welcome Pablo Cantu as our final panelist for this session. So we have actually a set of 7 to 8 questions for the panel today. My first question is actually for all the panelists. And it's more around how do you go about creating customer engagement strategies in your respective organizations, which actually caters to the modern audience. So basically the modern audience, the new age users, how do you actually reach out to your audience and how do you keep them engaged? And the second part of that question is, what should brands consider for customer engagement to resonate with consumers in the digital world? I'm going to start with Sebastian, if you can probably have a go at the question.
Yeah. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yeah. So maybe just one sentence about Syfe might help a bit as context. We are a holistic investment platform. We provide everything from savings product, basically guaranteed returns, to managed portfolios, to basically a full-fledged brokerage where people can buy tens of thousands of stocks and ETFs. And yeah, as Atit already mentioned, we started here in Singapore about 4 years ago. I've had about 100,000 customers here, and last year also expanded into Hong Kong and Australia, and we're building a business there. We work with MoEngage to basically really engage our customers, and I think is a type of business which really is built on trust. It's not something which is very transactional as many other businesses are. So it's really something which requires a lot of work in the initial phases to engage them, to get them actually to start investing with you. But then even once they are, I think it's really a long-term relationship which we are trying to build with our customers. So we are having retention periods which go over years, and not like Arit mentioned, I come from e-commerce, which is a very transactional, very short-lived business. So CRM for us is incredibly important, and I think what we do and how we, and we use AI already, and in a very similar ways to Merlin AI actually, just a bit more manual. We use generative AI to get inspiration, to get ideas for, push notifications, for what is good ideas for content, and we basically prompt ChatGPT and so on, and give us like 10 ideas for push notifications to achieve X, Y, and Z. I think that was the first step, and I think many businesses have done this already, and I think now it's being integrated into products which make this much easier. And the same way we are looking into how can we integrate AI and use that to personalize better for our customers, instead of like them basically segmenting, moving from segmentation to basically personalization, and helping our users to understand financial markets better, and give them a bit more, give them more relevant information, but also give them the information which is the right level of detail and the right level of expertise this specific customer requires.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian. Coming to Atit, you're also working in a fintech space, right? Not exactly similar to Syfe, what Sebastian talked about, but what is your view on this?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, thanks for having me here. And I think it gave me a chance to meet Sebastian. We probably, during COVID, we spoke over the Zoom multiple times, but never got a chance to meet. So thanks for that. I think coming from a Singtel standpoint, right, of course, everyone knows the telco part of the business, right? What we do is the lesser known part, is more like a startup within the Singtel world. We were trying to build an insurtech platform, payments, etc. I think going back, like I think a lot of people are using AI and other things, but I think going back, it's all about being able to use, so from a customer engagement standpoint, I feel in the modern day world, right? When a customer engage with you, he or she expects that you have some understanding, some background about this person. And what we're doing is being able to use that to really run multiple pilots, use machine learning based, right? So for example, if someone is traveling to, or someone lands at a Narita airport in Japan, right? And it could be different profiles. It could be a Gen Z, it could be a millennial, it could be a baby boomer, for whatever different person that there is. But the idea is to be able to, and each of these guys, where the event is the same, there is a different requirement, a different offer, a different engagement that's required for them. So, the idea is to focus on the process. And the idea that we're trying to do is how do we make that better? So we run multiple campaigns, tone of voice, offers, time of communication, etc., to be able to understand what is it that really resonates with this. And over a period of time, we've been able to make subsets and segments which we know respond to what kind of stuff, right? So it's really which is what we're focusing on, and how do we get that machine learning better every time that we go, so the propensity models become, a little sharper every time around.
Thanks, Atit. Srivatsa, what about at Grab? Like, how are you visualizing this? Is it something similar to what Seb and Atit added here, or is it a little different?
I think from a Grab's perspective, I think it's somewhat similar, but being part of a overall growth team, I think we also have, say, performance as well as CRM, essentially talking to the same customer together. So from our perspective, I think what we would want to see is one customer view, irrespective of, say, what channel that we are talking about. It could be, say, your paid, your CRM, your any kind of, say, channels. But I think from what we essentially would want to do is increase relevancy across the channels that we essentially are touching consumer on. So from that perspective, I think we are also essentially investing in the AI, and how do we essentially increase the overall relevancy by adding recommendation as well as personalization. So I think recommendation is one of the other key element that we essentially would definitely want to have to make sure that we are able to talk one-to-one to end consumer. And that way essentially it makes more sense for every community to be more relevant to the end consumer. So I think from a intro standpoint, I think most of us should be knowing Grab, whoever is here. I hope everybody took Grab when they came here. And if not, I would definitely would like to have a chat to see, is there anything that we can do better? Yeah, and have one-to-one discussion to essentially make it more relevant for you.
I'm sure most of us would also know the one-to-one personalization if you're using Grab, so we can probably check that out as well. Finally, coming to Pablo, what is your viewpoint on this, right? You're coming from industry which is very different, let's say, from the rest of the panelists. So, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for chopping me a seat here. That's very nice of you. And, well, to give some context, Muslim Pro is a religious utility app, right? And we have surpassed pretty good milestones, right? We passed over 150 million downloads. We are a global app. We have somewhat around 30 million monthly active users. And we just celebrated our 14th birthday. So there's not so many apps out there that are so old and they've been around so long and could acquire such a large user base in that area, right? So as head of product, I think one of the key areas, I think it's also the same for anyone who works on growth, is understanding the user. What do they really want? Why are they coming to the product? What are they looking for? And then we have to find some ways of creating a product experience that leads them very fast to discover that value. I think something that Facebook coined a long time ago with the aha moment, right? So now we want to create customer journeys where the user immediately comes in, they find what they want fairly quickly, and then they start to create a habit around the usage, right? That means we have to understand the user to a point where we know, like, what is actually their natural usage frequency, right? How often do they use or do certain things, to not have something that's too manufactured or feels alien to the user. And once we've understood that, then under the bell curve, we can create an experience that is suitable for the majority of the user base. And then only, I feel, comes the community aspect, right? So once we deliver on these core actions, then we can start to have like a community aspect around it, right? In our use case, that's then, for example, having like a prayer request that you can do for others, or maybe make prayers for other people. So overall, I think that creates a pretty good user experience there.
Thanks, Pablo. I'm actually going to get back to you on the user community question a little later as well. Would be great to hear your view on that. I'm going to start with the first question for Sebastian today, and I think some of that Srivatsa would be able to relate to it as well. So Sebastian, the first question for you is, I think Srivatsa talked about how super apps have this personalization, one-to-one recommendations, easy to use AI, right? So what can financial brands learn from that? Like, what are the things and strategies you can pick up from that point of view? And how can you leverage AI in the area of customer engagement?
Yeah, I think part of this I answered earlier already in a way, but I think if you open Grab and basically you open it and it will always suggest where do I want to go, right? Basically, they automatically tell me transport home. Or on Monday evening, I open it, it knows transport to my football, to my weekly football game. So I think it basically really like learns from my behavior and makes my life easier, right? And I think this is something which we are also trying to build, and how we want to leverage AI. I might be naive, but I basically believe that somehow this is a bit more tricky when it comes to financial products and giving financial advice. And you might tell me I'm wrong, but my naive view is I think it's a bit more tricky. So I think what we are trying to build is like, how can we, and this is the part I mentioned earlier already, how can we basically really make it relevant to the customer? And this does not only mean it talks about the specific financial goal this person wants to achieve, but it also needs to explain it in a level of detail which the person can understand. So, you know, on our platform, while the majority is very well educated, they work in very good jobs, they might have very different levels of understanding of financial markets. And some might be very into this and read Financial Times every day. Some others, they might be a brain surgeon, but they're not into financial markets. So the type of information we need to provide is very different. And I think we can really like leverage AI as well as, you know, all the customer attributes we have together with news, you know, to really like use AI basically to mesh all of this up and basically provide one relevant piece of information which is easily digestible and relevant for the specific user.
No, thanks, Seb. I personally use a lot of investments apps, and like I think in terms of Gen AI, you can also recommend where the customer is at in their investment journey and then curate some of those strategies. I think that really helps. Going on to my next question, this one is for Atit. And I'm sure a lot of us don't like a lot of these SMS push notifications and a lot of these calls coming without us giving us this information to that brand, right? And a lot of concerns around PII. Like PII going on cloud, banks are really scared. Now even brands, e-commerce companies also a little scared of having their PII go on third-party technologies. So my next question is, trust is a significant factor for today's customers, especially around PII. So how can companies navigate ethical concerns surrounding AI and customer engagement, especially around privacy, data usage, and even more importantly in the fintech or the financial sector?
Yeah, I think, like, you know, going back to the things that we, or probably my experiences and what we work on in payments or in insurance kind of space, right? I think payments is pretty unique because very different, right? I mean, for example, Syfe is a very high ticket size, you know, kind of a very, very matured audience, customers to understand, has to have a deep knowledge about it. From a payment standpoint, and you're talking about digital payments, the customer is probably interacting with you 3 or 4 times in a day, right? So it's maybe the same consumer, but views Syfe in a different way and views payments in a different way, right? And along with that, you are collecting data which is very different, right? So you're collecting transactional data, which is really which merchant you're spending on, online, offline, etc. And then you're also collecting behavioral data, which is to do with, you know, on your app, what's the IP, is he in the same country, is he an iPhone user, whatever it is, right? And I think it's to really give a good customer experience, somehow you need to be able to bring both these data points together, right? And now comes the tricky part about how do you ensure that you manage PII well, right? It's not only about communicating, but also managing it internally within the organization. I think the structure that probably works, or the framework that probably works the best, I mean, and I'm just going back to the basic, right? It's probably in the new AI world or in the earlier world is just 3 frameworks about when you're collecting the data, right? You be very transparent about what you're collecting and why you're collecting. And I think what we realize is sometimes if you're able to tell the customer the benefit of that data, that's really when it's easier to collect it. So you'll have less drop-offs happening from your forms. I mean, even if you do, you know, sign-ins through other third-party databases and all that, you still have the same concerns. The second part is if you're collecting data, there's some level of accountability and management of the data that you've collected. And hence, you know, the basics about, you know, being able to encrypt the data, manage it separately, transaction versus KYC data, etc., is important, right? I think the third thing is as and when you go on in your journey, ask for the incremental data thereon so that you're not collecting and asking customers for multiple data points right up front. And even I think from using it for for multiple sources. I think a good idea is probably to be able to convert the data into smaller variables, which are more masked, and then be able to use it so that if you're using it on AI platforms in the cloud, et cetera, also, you're taking baby steps versus just like exposing it all across. I think the last part of the whole platform is to be able to delete the data. I think a lot of us don't really look at that because from a financial standpoint also, you don't need to keep a data beyond 7 years, right? So are you able to delete it? Are you doing that correctly or not? I think all these three parts from collection, management to deletion are important in the process.
And Atit, are you also able to track customer preferences, which can impact how ethically you communicate with the customers? Like, do you track customer preferences?
Yeah, so I think that's something that we create out of running. Like I go back to the first thing that we spoke about. So, of course, as a telco, we have layered data, but we try to segment that and create. But instead of segmenting it, we run that profile, multiple campaigns to be able to understand your interest groups, et cetera, and then store it for us to be able to reach out to you again and refine that understanding. That second level data, of course, is also something that we try to understand and store in a way which is non-PII and becomes easier for customer to approach in the longer run.
Thanks, Atit. Thanks for the detailed answer. Our next question is around loyalty, and especially loyalty around being an app and not only competing in your sector, actually competing with all the apps in your phone, right? And competing for your users' attention. So my next question is actually for Srivatsa, and it's around, like in today's day and age, how do you go about building a loyal customer base? And I think we've talked about personalization earlier as well. What role exactly personalization plays in boosting loyalty?
I think almost all questions are interlinked, right? So from a overall aspect, right? Yeah, so from an overall aspect, I think what we essentially believe is consumer wants to have relevant content and relevant information, right? The more relevant that we essentially are able to share, the better, say, consumer essentially responds to the entire communication. So one is to personalization essentially means that, are we able to talk to them in terms of not at a overall, say, generic level? Like, say, things like we miss you churn campaign has been, like, say, very outdated, right? Nobody essentially now will ever open we miss you kind of email, right? But what essentially will help is to understand one level deeper and customize that particular aspect, which could be like, everybody is collecting a lot of information about the consumer based on the interaction that is happening. So how do we make it more relevant and more personalized is what will help us keep the consumer coming back to the app again and again. So from a personalization standpoint, I think what it does is to make the overall experience much more relevant and also helps them to understand, the information that we are giving is actually going to add value to them. If it is not adding value, there is no consumer hook. So from a consumer hook standpoint, I think relevancy as well as the personalization essentially is the key factor because everybody is going to do some level of, say, personalization, right? But the depth at which we go is going to be the key differentiator. So that is essentially what I think we are also striving for. I'm sure everybody in this panel is trying to strive for. How do we essentially get to the sweet spot of making it more and more relevant to the end consumer and keep essentially making the communication more and more relevant based on the activities and what interest they have shown on our app.
Thanks a lot for that, Srivatsa. Just coming back to the personalization point, I just had one more question over there. Do you think Quickwins as an app also help? Like, what I mean by quick win is like that short form of personalization, which I think Seb talked about earlier. Let's say opening the app and the app knowing that you have to go for your football game today, to that particular page. So how does that work? Like, do you think those are...
So that comes as a overall recommendation part of personalization. Okay. So think about it. Right? Say I'm a vegetarian. If you show me, say, a full food of, say, non-vegetarian food, for sure I'm not going to interact. If you send me an email of say having images of, say, meat, for sure, right? So I think based on our overall recommendation as well as personalization will always depend on the things that we have done. Like if I'm ordering continuously say Indian vegetarian food for a week, maybe my wife is not at home for this week. Right? So and essentially we are not cooking, so maybe I'm just ordering in food again and again. So that kind of, say, behavior and also the key trigger point, say, identification is determined by the overall data that you're collecting, which is on your events as well as attributes. The combination of the two, how micro-segmenting that we are able to create essentially is the key to understand how we essentially are able to do it.
Thanks for that. I'm going to go to Pablo now. And I think, Pablo, we were talking about communities and virtual communities, right? So I think the question is more around, in this digital age, how do you go about creating these value-based virtual communities, especially at Muslim Pro? And how do you leverage these communities to stay connected with the audience and use them for engagement as well?
So I think in the introduction, I touched kind of like on this reasoning. Why do people come to the app, right? What are they looking for, right? And I talked about this aha moment. So let's say the user is coming for something and they've discovered the value. Maybe in Grab it's the first time when you have a good ride with a nice car that's driving and you see on the maps how close it is, right? For us, it's a little bit different. For us, it might be that you see the prayer times according to your location, even when you're traveling. Or it is when you find the Quran in the translation so you can understand it, right, and read it. So once we have this aha moment and it happened, right, we will create a customer journey around something that you create a habit around it. We will say something like, just reading 5 minutes of the Quran per week will bring you closer to your faith. And after 3 weeks or something like this, when we see that the user has actually consistently used the app, we can say somewhat of they have a habit around the product, right? And now is the important part where personalization kicks in, right? Once the user has created a habit around that feature or the service, we then think about ways of how can we deepen that engagement, right? So the deepening engagement part in this scenario would be, hey, you have been reading the Quran for 3 weeks. Would you like to learn more? Or would you like to watch something about this? Or you want to start memorizing the Quran? So we can actually open the door and new features that might be interesting, right? In this case, the previous usage has qualified the user for these new features and opening the door in that direction. So now in our time, it's so awesome because we can leverage generative AI, right? So in the past, we would have had to think of ways how we manually create memorization techniques or lessons about how do you study something that you want to learn, right? But now we can create, let's say, 200 question and answer scenarios. We feed it to a generative AI model, and it can create indefinite more multiple choice questions for us, right, that are engaging for the user. So I think that's really the crux there, right? So we can now use this awfully cheap technology to create things that are really valuable for the user base. So I think it's a really great time. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that, Pablo. And we've been talking about these engagement strategies. I think the question comes up, how do you measure them? How do you effectively understand if it's working or not? How do these recommendations, personalization, or any of these strategies you use, are they giving you ROI or not? So I think the next question, and this is for Atit, is around how do you measure the effectiveness of customer engagement strategies? Or like how should brands go about it?
Yeah, I think going back to the business objective of the whole thing, right? I think it's like the principle probably that to be looked at is twofold. One is from a customer standpoint or from a business standpoint for that particular customer, what is the customer lifetime value? So one way to look at it is like the tenure of the customer plus, the number of product holdings that has. And I think coming from a both bank and a telco kind of a background, I think we see that important. So you have a card, do I upsell you a personal loan, etc. So product holdings per customer. I think the real way, or I think the far outpost kind of thing for this one is if a customer can really genuinely, and not for a $5 voucher or $10 voucher, but can genuinely refer you to another person, I think that shows a lot of value, right? So one is the customer's own lifetime value that adds value to the business, and second is, can that person be someone who can refer another customer to come in, and genuinely, see value in what he's getting out of this brand. I think some of the layer 2 drivers could be things like conversion rates, right? So and going back to the banking example, you're a card customer, I run a campaign for say an investment plan for you, versus I run an investment plan, same campaign for a customer who's not my card customer, what's the conversion rate like? So that probably goes to show that engaged customer, happy the brand, chance of you being able to get higher conversion is better, right, on that one. I think the other things like reviews, etc., in the digital world that we all keep gunning for, and I think that's another way to see whether the customer is really happy, doing a time and regular check-in digitally at every experience on transaction, etc., is another way to be able to do it. I think the last way that I see probably is, based on the industry, there are some dynamics. Like for example, for a wallet business, on a mobile wallet business, a layered way that we look at it is how much of the balance the customer is holding in the wallet, right? Which shows some trust on you, or shows the future of the use case that he's going to be using it on. Similarly, from a credit card perspective, are you the primary card on Apple Pay or Google Pay or not? So these are other industry level layered drivers that you would look at to know whether your engagement strategies are really fructifying or not. Yeah.
So Atit, you talked about the non-incentivized customer referral, right? So are you able to track that right now as a metric?
Yeah, we definitely can track that. Are we doing a good job at that? I think we can do a lot more, but we can track it to some extent.
I think just to add on some of this measurement, right? I think the tricky part is you can very easily measure the short-term effects. Like if you send a more personalized message, do people open it more? Do this maybe read more of it? Spend more time on the page or something like this. I think the more tricky part then is like in our business, which is, as I mentioned earlier, like less transactional. So the positive outcome might not happen immediately, but it might happen over a longer period of time. It's more difficult then to attribute it to this specific initiative. So in our case, like just because I send him a very personalized message, he might not top up and put another $5,000 in his portfolio. So we, in the short term, can see, okay, yes, the open rate was higher, all those kind of, like proxy metrics. But then the tricky part is like, do we see an improvement of metrics over like a month or 2 months or even 3 months, where we see that like churn is lower, people are topping up more, people are trading more, and all those kind of things. I think that's a bit of a challenge, and I think that's what we are also looking into, like how can we really, move from the short term to like the more longer term effects.
And Sebastian, I actually wanted to ask you one more thing. Let's say from e-commerce to fintech, and I'm sure there'll be people in the audience from across sectors, right? Do these success criteria or success metrics change, or does the North Star still remain the same?
Yeah, no, I think also in e-commerce you want to create long-term relationships with your customers, but a lot of things are a bit more immediate, and I think I could imagine this maybe for a food delivery or ride-hailing app, that some of the things are a bit more immediate and you can immediately see the transaction. On other businesses like ours, it takes more time to take effect, and I think that's one of the key differences. But I think the long term is still also important for the lifetime value. I think Grab will look into this as much as we do.
So maybe just to add on to that, because like for us, one of the things that was really a revelation to us was understanding the users that stay instead of the ones that churn. So maybe for you guys it's the same. Like if you see the people that top up $5,000, right? What were the actions, or how are they different from the ones that don't top up the 5,000, right? And once you do this kind of analysis, you will understand how to create the customer journey, right? So for us, that was really, really helpful. We just really thoroughly analyzed the ones that are staying, the most engaged users. How are they different from the ones that churn, right? And then you create that user journey around that most common successful use case, right? So that was really good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in our case, basically, once the person takes the action, basically at this moment, in case the user churns, it's too late. Like you're not going to stop the user anymore from churning. Like you can call him and do whatever you want. You won't convince him otherwise, most likely. And the same thing with the positive actions where people top up or whatever. So I think what Harris, like who leads our life cycle marketing, does a lot with our analytics team is like to understand exactly what you said, like what happened prior to that, right? And what were the actions and the messages received prior, to the end result, to try to build correlations and try to build models where for the next one we can act earlier and basically drive either the customer to a specific action or avoid a specific action in case of withdrawals and churn and those kind of things.
If I can add another, I think to what Seb was saying, I think from a lot of financial services, if I'm not mistaken, is not transactional. It's more like I'm building a lifetime value with you, and the more you stay with me, the more I know you, and the more value, even the brand gets out of the customer. But I think what's different is some of these products, right, are fairly new. So you don't really have a set pattern on how much the lifetime value or how much is going to be the tenure of the customer. When that happens, you really don't know that if there's a negative experience the customer is having and you want to be able to address it, how much and how far can you go, right, to be able to retain this customer? So I think the learning that comes over a period of time, but that's only going to take some time to come, is where you keep segmenting customers further to really understand the lifetime value of each of these things. So you have a number based on it, and then you know how far you can go and how much can you expense to be able to retain this, right? I think something that there are a lot of new age industries probably are facing as well, because like you said, once you lose them, it's not like a transaction product that I'm going to get you back, right? It's difficult to turn that trust around again.
Thanks a lot for that, Atit. And I think the bigger takeaways when especially comes to this kind of a customer engagement is how do you understand your customer at each and every life point from day one? Even when you're losing it, if you can understand your customer better, then you can preempt and ensure that doesn't happen in the future. And I'm sure from sector to sector, I think I asked Seb as well, it will vary. Some sectors, it can be a quick win or a quick sale. Other sectors, you can actually build longer loyalty. Coming to the next question, and this for Srivatsa, what role do you think AI can play in improving a super app like Grab, especially online and offline, when it comes to customer experiences? And how can you go about providing relevant customer recommendations and behavior, based on behavior across different products and categories on the app itself?
I think this is the most important thing for us, right? Wherein the recommendation that we essentially give is optimized to the end consumer. So, and that trickles down to every department, which is right from your, say, customer experience, which is your first app that you're seeing, your homepage, to a CRM team who essentially is sending out your notifications, everything, right? So essentially it's a 360-degree kind of, say, optimization to make sure that, a consumer essentially is getting the same kind of experience everywhere, right? So when we send out a food digest, what you are going to get is going to be very different than what I'm going to get. That is because what you have ordered will be very different than what I've ordered, right? So from that perspective, I think the customization is what we are striving to achieve there. And in addition to it, right, I think from an AI standpoint, what we essentially are also investing in is to enhance the overall experience. So for very example, right, simple example is the images that you essentially have can be enhanced much more easier now with stable diffusion and everything coming in, right? So how do we essentially improve our overall, say, everything that we are sending essentially is something that we are also investing in. Second is the entire thing that you showed, right, wherein you essentially use ChatGPT kind of say experience. We are also building that, right? Like say what kind of say tone makes sense for every person. Not like say everybody would like say a rock kind of say thing, but maybe for me it would be something else, right? So the messaging, the user and the journey and the frequency, the time, every variable that is there can be used. AI essentially can help us automate it. Historically, I think everybody would try to automate this manually by understanding the entire analysis of what is happening. From an AI standpoint, I think the ideal stage that we would also want to move to is to have all these variables which are there and try to see what would the ideal stage be for that particular consumer and how do we essentially achieve that. So that essentially is the ideal stage for us. And then that is the reason why as Grab growth team, we are investing heavily in all the entire, like say, is the picture that we are sending, is it of the highest quality or not? And then does it get rejected at the entry point itself? So those kind of say things essentially will help us make sure that, a consumer essentially has the best experience in every touch point that we essentially are going to do.
Thanks a lot for that, Vatsa. Pablo, I have the same question for you because Muslim Pro is actually a utility super app, right? Would you also relate to some of the things which Vatsa talked about?
Yeah, well, I think it's not only up to the technology then what we leverage there, right? I also think it's then up to the talent in your team that you have, right? So you can have all the great technology, but in the end, if you cannot have a passionate team around using that technology and leveraging that technology, you'll have a very hard time picking it up, right? So I like the example before, I think from the Job CEO who said like, well, if it doesn't excite me or the team, then it's probably not going to excite the user base, right? So at the very heart of that, it means that you must have a talented team that is passionate about what they do. And I think that's equally important as much as the technology you're trying to leverage. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that. And I'm going to come to Seb now. Seb, this question is around what is the importance of customer centricity when it comes to customer engagement? And the second part is in terms of Syfe, like when it's translated to, how has customer centricity translated for Syfe, especially in areas of bridging the knowledge gap when it comes to wealth management?
Okay. Yeah, so customer centricity, and again, like I think Arif from Job covered it already. Like first you need to understand your customer, otherwise you can't be customer centric. So I think it's all about getting the right data, and apart from getting it, you're able to use it. And I think we have similar number of attributes, like about every single customer. People like provide all kind of different data in order for us to create like financial plans for them. So we're in a lucky situation that we have quite a lot. We mask this data, of course, before using this anywhere. But yeah, and that basically is the foundation of us being able to be customer centric, right? I think knowledge to action or knowledge action gap, right? I think this is really this typical inertia which people have when it comes to many different things in their life, which they know it's important, but somehow they don't take action. And it's the same for our customers, and I think it's the same for when it comes to like investing. People know inflation is high. They read it in the news every single day. Nevertheless, they basically keep it in their bank account and accumulate it there. So I think what we're trying to do is basically identifying what are these customer needs, and then basically giving the right nudges. And this can be through, all the outreach channels, like from WhatsApp to, email, push notifications, etc. But this also might be on the app. So when people come there to check their holdings, etc., like what are the right information they need at this time in order to move from knowledge and from like seeing something to action. So I think, I think it really like starts with understanding that will allow you to then basically build the right tools to nudge them in the right moment with the right data in order to drive action.
And I'm assuming a lot of potential users are, the core focus is how do you drive them from knowledge to action, if I'm not wrong? How do you ensure, let's say for a lot of users who are not using the app, but are still on the app but are not actively investing?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a base of like dormant users which you want to try to like activate and engage. But in our case, it's also about like, really like users who are on the platform, but they might not take action. They're passive, right? Which might be also the desired outcome. But I think there's also an opportunity to cross-sell them, because we really have a very wide range of products, and I think we have lots of opportunities to then cross-sell them across our different verticals, from cash management to brokerage, or from brokerage to the managed portfolios, and yeah, so I think there's a lot of opportunities with our active customers, I think equally as much as those who are dormant.
Got it. Thanks a lot for that. And I think one of our final questions for today is for Pablo. The question is around, especially for Singapore, right? And we talked about AI technologies. I'm sure a lot of us being bombarded by these technologies. So how do brands stay up to date with evolving customer engagement strategies and technologies like Gen AI, especially when it comes to Singapore?
Yeah, so I hinted before, I think the talent is really important, right? So for us at Bits Media, we try to cover our user base in equal splits also in our team. That means like starting from the top, we have 2 CEOs, we have Nick and Farah, so there's an equal male and female split, right? And then we try to have that in all of our teams, right? So we really try to reflect our user base within our own team. And that kind of like protects us from falling in any kind of bias. I think especially in tech, there's been a lot of news about like how some of the tech is falling into a certain bias direction, right? In order to avoid such kind of bias, it's important to have like a really good team that reflects the user base, right? And that's pretty tough in Singapore, because for us, we are a global app, right? As I said, like we have over 150 million downloads across the world, so we're really present in every part of the world. But now if we fall in that trap of thinking about our project only from the lens of Singapore, then in the end, it might not be useful for people outside of Singapore. So the example of chopping is a good one, right? Because for us, especially in religious utility, there are certain practices or customs that might only apply for Muslims in Southeast Asia, but maybe not for Muslims in the US or in Sweden and Europe, right? So we really have to protect us from falling into any kind of bias, right? So Singapore is amazing, right? We have like all the tech supplies, all the great companies are here, right? We have cool events like this one, right? So then the only difficulty in Singapore is having then like a team that reflects a global scope, right? I mean, I'm sure all the publishers here, hiring isn't easy in Singapore, so that would be one caveat, right?
Thanks a lot for that. And I'm assuming it's about getting the right riders for the right car is basically what we are looking at, and also ensuring everyone is capable enough to run those technologies. Before we end the session, it'll be great to have one key takeaway from all of you on when it comes to leveraging AI in customer engagement. It'll be great to have that one key takeaway for our audience here. Pablo, maybe it'll be great to start with you.
So I would give anyone the good suggestion, just like I said, like try to understand your most happy customers, right? And maybe don't go too exotic, right? Don't go into like the super niche 1% of power users, right? But I mean like under the bell curve, the ones that are really the good ones. And then think about ways how you could leverage these new technologies to just create more of that and keep the user excited so they don't get bored by the same experience over and over again. That'd be my take on it.
Srivatsa.
For me, I think there are hundreds of companies that are popping up every day and becoming .ai, right? So how we essentially approach the entire, the current state of ecosystem is by starting with the problems that we are trying to solve for and identifying specific, say, partners who can solve for it. And that essentially will help you, say, save a lot of time, not essentially go after everything that is there, right? And most of the things that are coming in will not be, say, enterprise grade initially, but look at the potential of, say, what the product looks like, and then if it looks good, have the ability to take the risk and try it out. And if it works, and then you essentially move on to a better approach overall.
Yeah, I'm hoping it works for everyone.
For sure.
Sebastian.
I think most buzzwords, like they come and eventually they go. And I personally hate most of jargon and buzzwords, but I think AI is a bit different. I think it will actually stay and it will really change the way how customer engagement is done and how we can personalize things. So I think if you or your company is not yet looking into it, I think you definitely should.
Atit, what about you?
I think I still think going back to the basic is like customer lifetime value is the most important, and it comes from in the new age world where there are more digital brands. It comes from customer engagement rather than brand marketing, right? And if you look at that, basically means understand a customer, and from a consumer standpoint, touch me less and tell me less, but when you do, make it more relevant, right? And I think using AI as a tool to do that is what's cool, but the basic is to be able to get your foundations right in terms of your segments, your communication, etc. And that can probably be altered and made faster by using AI.
Thanks a lot for that. And I hope everyone could take away something from this session.